You want to cut through the noise, right? Get straight to the heart of things. Understand these big historical moments without getting bogged down.
Yeah, totally. It's easy to feel overwhelmed.
Exactly. So that's what we're doing today. Think of it like your fast track to really getting a handle on something significant.
And today, we're diving into the International Military Tribunal for the Far East. You probably know it better as the Tokyo trial.
Right. That was the court set up back in 1946. Its job was to try Japan's top political and military leaders for war crimes. A huge undertaking.
Absolutely huge. And our source material for this deep dive is pretty special. It's the Tokyo Trial Diaries of Mei Ju-ao.
And what makes this source so valuable is that Dr. Mei wasn't just some outside observer. He was actually on the tribunal. He was the Chinese judge.
So you get this incredible double perspective. He's a jurist, a legal mind, but he's also someone whose country suffered immensely from the events leading up to the trial.
We're looking specifically at excerpts from his diary covering, his arrival in Tokyo, those first few weeks as the tribunal was just getting set up.
Yeah, so our mission, if you like, is to pull out the key insights from those early diary entries. What was the atmosphere like? What were the immediate challenges, the big issues they were grappling with right at the start?
Because getting that firsthand account, it just gives you a feel for it that you can't get from a dry history book, right?
Exactly. It makes it immediate, personal. You understand the human element behind this massive historical event.
Okay, so let's get into it. His journey starts March 20th, 1946. He's flying from Shanghai to Tokyo. U.S. military plane. What's his first impression?
Well, one of the first things that strikes him is how the American officers treat him once they find out he's a judge. There's this immediate respect.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it gets him thinking, about the status of judges in Western cultures like the UK and the US, how central the rule of law is, and the sort of inherent respect that comes with that position.
A bit of a cultural observation right off the bat.
Definitely. He sort of contrasts it, perhaps implicitly, with other contexts. It's a subtle point, but telling.
He also noticed a couple other passengers on that flight, didn't he? Japanese passengers.
He did. 2 Japanese individuals. And he's quite curious about them. Wonders who they are.
Like, why are they on a U.S. military plane?
Exactly. He speculates, could they be peaceniks or communists, his words? Suggesting, they weren't just average citizens hopping a flight. There must have been some reason, some clearance. Adds a little intrigue to the trip.
And then he lands at Atsugi Airport. The welcome he gets is, well, a bit more than he expected.
Yeah, surprisingly high level. He's met by a Colonel Huff. May understands Huff is pretty senior, maybe handling protocol or hospitality under General MacArthur himself, the Supreme Commander, GHQ.
So not just some junior officer meeting the plane.
Right. The fact that someone like Huff was there to greet him, it definitely made an impression. He notes even other people on the plane seem surprised by the level of formality.
Okay, so a distinguished welcome, but then the drive into Tokyo itself.
Yeah.
That must have been sobering.
Oh, absolutely. Starkly sobering. As they drive from Atsugi towards Tokyo, they pass through Yokohama, and the devastation. It's immense.
Total contrast to the formal welcome.
Completely. He remembers Japan from about 22 years earlier, and this landscape of ruin is just shocking to him. Yokohama, then parts of Tokyo, just flattened.
And that sight must have hit hard, especially given his perspective as the Chinese judge.
Exactly. Seeing that destruction firsthand, it seems to really solidify his conviction. The people responsible for this, for the war, they must be held accountable. He even mentions Colonel Huff sharing a story about his own home in Manila being burned by the Japanese. There's this shared sense, perhaps, of loss and the need for justice.
He gets to his accommodation, the famous Imperial Hotel. What were his thoughts on that? Was it what he expected?
Not quite, actually. He seems to have pictured something grander, more modern, maybe like some big Western-style hotels in Shanghai.
But the Imperial Hotel, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, it's iconic, isn't it? Though maybe not flashy in the way he imagined.
Right. He notes it's older, only 2 stories, not outwardly imposing, but he does acknowledge its famous earthquake-resistant design. And crucially, it's where a lot of the GHQ top brass were staying, including MacArthur sometimes. So functionally important, even if architecturally surprising to him.
And his day-to-day life there seems very American-influenced.
Very much so. He mentions eating all his meals in his room, served by the GHQ, and the food. He describes it as pretty monotonous American cuisine.
Maybe not a gourmet experience.
Apparently not. He even notes the ingredients were supposedly shipped all the way from the U.S., and the only newspapers readily available are Stars and Stripes, the U.S. military paper, and the English-language Nippon Times. Gives you a sense of the bubble, almost.
So he starts meeting people, other key figures. Justice John P. Higgins, the American judge, comes out early on.
Yes, that's an important early contact. He meets Higgins and a Mr. McDougal. May makes a point in his diary of noting Higgins's credentials: former congressman, Chief Justice of the Massachusetts Superior Court.
So heavyweight jurist.
Definitely. You can imagine these initial meetings were crucial for just starting to figure out how they were all going to work together. The huge task ahead for the tribunal.
And then there's this really interesting bit about an article by Owen Lattimore. It sparks quite a bit of thought for May.
Yes, this is fascinating. Lattimore, a well-known scholar of Asia, had written something warning the U.S. He was saying essentially, don't underestimate Japan. It could bounce back as an industrial and economic power much faster than people think.
And this resonated with Mei Ju-ao.
It really did. Lattimore suggested that maybe the reports of widespread suffering and hardship in Japan were a bit exaggerated, that the population generally looked surprisingly healthy.
Which matched what May himself was seeing.
Exactly. May notes his own observations kind of lined up with Lattimore's point. Despite the devastation and the defeat, the people didn't seem quite as broken as one might expect. It raises this interesting question, doesn't it? How do you really gauge the state of a nation right after a war?
Perception versus reality. And Lattimore actually suggested specific policies.
He did. He proposed things like restricting Japan's access to key raw materials needed for heavy industry, and also promoting land reform, trying to empower farmers and boost agricultural self-sufficiency.
Policies aimed at preventing a future resurgence, essentially.
Pretty much. And May seems to have found these arguments quite compelling. It shows he wasn't just thinking about the legal proceedings, but also about the bigger picture, the long-term future of Japan and the region.
Okay, moving into his social life and other observations, there's a canceled trip.
Yeah, he was supposed to go to the Atami Hot Springs, which sounds nice. But it gets canceled because General Zhu Shiming is arriving.
Who was he?
Zhu was set to be China's representative on the Allied Council for Japan. That was the body overseeing the occupation, distinct from the tribunal, but obviously related.
So May, as the Chinese judge, would naturally be involved in greeting him. Shows the intersection of the legal and the political.
Absolutely. It underlines how the trial wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was deeply embedded in the post-war diplomatic and political restructuring of Japan.
And then there's a cocktail party, hosted by General Eichelberger. Another chance to mingle.
Right. Eichelberger commanded the U.S. Eighth Army. At this party, May gets to meet other judges, Lord Patrick from the UK, the acting president Northcroft from New Zealand. He also meets some of the prosecutors.
And he makes an interesting observation there about judges and prosecutors.
He does. He notes the sort of taboo, as he puts it, in common law systems like the US and UK against judges and prosecutors getting too chummy. The need to maintain that strict separation and impartiality.
A difference from maybe other legal traditions.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
It highlights his awareness of these different legal cultures coming together for the trial.
But maybe the most impactful event from this early period was that flight he took. The B-17 flight.
Oh, definitely. General Eichelberger invited him and 5 other judges on this flight in a B-17 Flying Fortress to see Mount Fuji, but also Hiroshima.
Wow, that must have been profound.
It clearly was. He described seeing the scale of the destruction from the air. Yokohama, again, Nagoya Industrial Centers, heavily bombed. Kobe, too, lots of damage.
Did they see Kyoto?
Yes, and he notes Kyoto was largely spared, its cultural sites preserved. But then Hiroshima. Seeing the aftermath of the atomic bomb.
What was his reaction?
He reflects very deeply on it. The sheer, almost unimaginable power of this new weapon. And it immediately makes him think about the future, the terrifying possibility of a third world war fought with such weapons. It's a really chilling moment in the diary.
Understandably. Did he notice anything else from the air? He mentions agriculture.
He does, yeah. Flying over the countryside, he's struck by how neat and orderly the Japanese paddy fields look. Signs of hard work, diligence.
And he compares it to China?
He does. He contrasts it with maybe the more varied, sometimes less organized farming he knew back home. And he observes that even after the war, the Japanese peasants seem to have a relatively decent standard of living, maybe compared to Chinese peasants.
Which ties back to that Lattimore discussion, doesn't it? About Japan's underlying condition.
Exactly. It's another piece of his observation puzzle, suggesting a certain societal resilience or structure.
Later on, there's a more relaxed moment, visiting a Japanese pub with colleagues.
Yeah, a bit of downtime. Shows some camaraderie building among the international group. They apparently discussed the situation back in China.
And then the judges get down to some practical business, the weather.
Ah, yes. Seems mundane, but it was a real concern. They're facing the prospect of conducting this incredibly intense trial through a Tokyo summer, in a building likely without air conditioning. Plus, the heat from the camera is needed for filming.
That sounds pretty awful, actually.
Right. So they have a conference, and MacArthur had apparently suggested maybe adjourning for 2 months during the worst of the heat. But the judges decide against that. Instead, they formally request air conditioning be installed and ask that the camera crews don't use continuous hot spotlights. Practicalities matter.
Definitely. Okay, let's shift to the wider political scene. The first general election happens in post-war Japan. What's Mei's take on that?
He seems a bit underwhelmed, maybe. He expresses some disappointment at what he perceives as a lack of public enthusiasm or excitement around the election.
Compared to what he'd seen elsewhere.
Yeah, he contrasts it with his memories of elections in the U.S., which are often, much more fervent. It suggests he's thinking about how democracy takes root or doesn't in different cultural soil.
It comes a really key moment. Word arrives that the indictment is finally ready.
Huge news. Chief Prosecutor Joseph Keenan sends a letter saying it'll be ready by April 15th. This really kicks things into high gear for the judges.
They have to figure out the process, right? How to formally receive it, the arraignment.
Exactly. Planning starts immediately. And Mei makes an interesting suggestion. He thinks the tribunal itself, not just the prosecution team, should be the ones to formally deliver the indictment copies to the defendants in prison.
Why was that important to him?
It seems to be about establishing the tribunal's authority and independence right from the start, making it clear they are the ultimate judicial body overseeing this, not just acting on the prosecution's behalf.
During this time, Mei also has that meeting with General MacArthur. That must have been significant.
Oh, absolutely. Meeting the Supreme Commander, the man effectively running Japan. They cover a lot of ground.
Like what?
The international situation, the recent election in Japan, the new draft constitution being worked on. They also discuss China's role in the war, its sacrifices, and what Mei describes as China's lenient attitude towards Japan afterwards.
How did Mei feel about MacArthur?
It seems complicated. He records the conversation, but also notes his own mixed feelings. Some concern, perhaps, about MacArthur's policies, the direction Japan might take. He even mentions seeing criticism of MacArthur in the Soviet and British press. So he's aware of the controversies surrounding the general.
On a lighter note, Mei hosts his own party for the judges.
He does, a
Yeah.
small cocktail party. And he gets General Wang, who seems to be part of the Chinese delegation, to display some Chinese art. Calligraphy, paintings, including a famous piece called the Saturn Peach Temple Fair.
How did that go down?
Really well, apparently. The other judges were very impressed. It sounds like a nice moment of cultural exchange, building some personal connections among this very diverse group, and maybe subtly reminding everyone of China's deep cultural heritage.
There's also a meeting with General Zhu Gongliang, presumably related to General Zhu Shiming from earlier.
Seems likely, perhaps part of the same delegation. They discussed the Allied Council and the Tokyo trial, again showing those links.
And the judges themselves are debating some fundamental legal points, like dissenting opinions.
Right. Should individual judges be allowed to write dissenting opinions if they disagree with the majority judgment? Or should the tribunal present only a single unified verdict?
It's a big question for any court, let alone an international one.
Exactly. It touches on different legal traditions. Some systems really value those dissents, others prioritize a single voice. The fact they're debating it shows they're grappling with how to forge a common procedure.
Okay, the trial date is getting closer. Preparations intensify. They're actually rehearsing in the courtroom.
Yes, doing run-throughs, testing the equipment, especially the simultaneous interpretation system, which was crucial. Imagine coordinating interpreters for all the different languages involved.
Must have been complex.
Hugely. And even during these rehearsals, there are journalists and photographers present. The media spotlight was intense from the very beginning. They also took formal, official photographs of the judges around this time.
And they had to figure out where everyone would sit, didn't they? The judges' seating arrangement.
Seems like a small detail, but again, symbolic. After some discussion, they decide to seat the judges based on the order their country signed Japan's instrument of surrender.
So, following the order of victory, essentially.
Pretty much. It reflected that post-war reality. China, having signed after the US, UK, and Soviet Union, would be fourth in the seating order, which Mei notes.
MacArthur sends me a personal note, too.
Yes, a letter expressing pleasure at Mei's presence on the tribunal and inviting him for lunch, acknowledging his role.
And that sensitive issue, the emperor, it comes up again.
Among the prosecutors, yes. The debate about whether Emperor Hirohito should be indicted flared up again. Mei notes that legally, some felt there were grounds. But ultimately, the issue was shelved, tabled. The political implications were just too massive. Indicting the emperor could have destabilized the entire occupation. It's a stark example of politics influencing the legal process.
Then they formally sign their oaths as judges.
A solemn moment, solidifying their commitment. And they finally set the date and time for formally accepting the indictment from the prosecution, Monday, April 29th at 11 a.m.
The wheels are really in motion now.
Definitely. On that Monday, Chief Prosecutor Keenan officially presents the massive indictment document to the assembled judges.
And they set the trial start date.
Yes. The trial proper, starting with the arraignment of the defendants, is scheduled for Friday, May 3rd at 10:30 a.m.
How's Mei feeling as this moment arrives?
You get a real sense of the weight of responsibility he feels. Representing China, seeking justice after so much suffering, he understands the historical significance of what's about to happen.
And the first day of the trial itself, May 3rd, what's the scene like?
Intense. It's held at the former Japanese War Ministry building. Security is tight. The accused are brought in from Sugamo prison under heavy guard.
A dramatic arrival.
Absolutely. Then the judges make their entrance into the courtroom, again in that specific order based on the instrument of surrender.
And President Webb, the Australian judge who is president of the tribunal, opens the proceedings.
Yes, he gives an opening speech. Mei takes in the scene, the courtroom layout, the large prosecution team led by Keenan, the rows of defense lawyers, many of them American, interestingly, and then the accused.
Seeing them in the dock for the first time?
26 of them initially present, including the big names like Hideki Tojo, the former prime minister, and Kenji Dohahara, a key military intelligence figure heavily involved in China. Mei describes seeing them there, their faces, and feeling this surge of resentment, but also deep sorrow for what China endured.
The courtroom must have been packed.
Completely. Huge press contingent, journalists from all over the world, lots of spectators too. It was a global event. There was even a VIP section with allied officials. He notes General Zhu Gongliang from the Chinese delegation is there.
Is MacArthur there?
Interestingly, no. Mei notes MacArthur is absent because he's welcoming former U.S. President Herbert Hoover, who was visiting Japan.
Okay, so the trial resumes for the arraignment proper. More defendants present.
Yes. 2 more had arrived, Itagaki and Kimura. So now all 28 main defendants are there. The reading of the long indictment begins.
And Mei is watching the defendants.
Closely. Observing their postures, their expressions as the charges are read out, again, triggering strong emotions for him. They take a recess at one point.
And then the pleas. How do they plead?
Every single one of the 28 pleads not guilty. Some apparently quite defiantly, even angrily.
No surprises there, perhaps, but still sets the tone.
Definitely sets an adversarial tone. And then, almost immediately, a challenge comes from the defense.
What happened?
One of the Japanese Dashoush lawyers, a man named Kiyose, stands up and challenges the impartiality of President Webb, and even more fundamentally, challenges the entire jurisdiction and legitimacy of the tribunal itself.
Right at the very beginning.
Exactly. Talk about drama. The judges have to call another recess to debate this unexpected challenge amongst themselves.
How do they respond?
They discuss it, presumably quite heatedly, their conclusion. They decide they, as judges, don't actually have the authority to dismiss one of their own members like Webb. They uphold the tribunal's structure.
So they reject the challenge.
They do. They return to the courtroom, the arraignment resumes, and each defendant formally enters their plea of not guilty. The battle lines are drawn.
Wow. So wrapping up this deep dive into Mei Ju-ao's early diary entries, we really covered a lot. His arrival, those first impressions of a devastated but resilient Tokyo.
Yeah, the forming of the tribunal itself, navigating that complex mix of international law, diplomacy, and post-war politics, the personalities involved.
The meticulous preparations, the rehearsals, figuring out the practicalities, and then finally that incredibly momentous opening day and the dramatic start to the arraignment.
And getting it all through his eyes, the eyes of the Chinese judge, it just adds such a unique layer. You feel his sense of responsibility, his reactions to seeing the accused, his grappling with these huge questions of justice, and history.
It's not just abstract history, it's a lived experience.
Exactly. And hopefully for you listening, this deep dive gives you that richer, more textured understanding we talked about at the start. These initial entries, they really do set the stage for everything that follows in the long Tokyo trial.
It provides that crucial foundation.
Definitely. So maybe a final thought to leave you with. Think about those initial impressions May had, the challenges they faced right from day one, the
Mhm.
cultural differences, the political pressures, the sheer logistics of it all.
How might those very early experiences, those first few weeks, have shaped the entire course of the trial, the judgments that eventually came down?
Right. What questions do these opening days raise for you about international justice itself, about how we try to hold individuals accountable for mass atrocities, especially in the messy aftermath of a world war? It really makes you think about the human element, doesn't it? And the long shadow these events still cast.